Today I want to cover an idea I've taken from Sigmund Freud, and I need to caveat that because the idea isn't explicitly related to Freud's writings. He never explicitly wrote about this idea, but it's nevertheless strongly associated with him, and it's believed that Freud gave this piece of advice to an associate, and that kind of oral history has developed around this idea that it originated with Freud. Now, what does the idea do? The idea harnesses the power of the unconscious. It utilizes the power of the unconscious to help you make important and big decisions that would otherwise potentially cause you a lot of thinking and anxiety. Now, firstly, it's worth thinking about the unconscious itself, right? The term unconscious wasn't actually coined by Freud originally. It was originally coined by an earlier German philosopher named Schelling. And the idea was that the mind is more than the conscious contents of the mind. So a metaphor that I like to use is, imagine the mind as a darkened room and your consciousness is a spotlight. And the spotlight illuminates certain objects at one time and moves around the room, so it illuminates various objects. But there's always the other things in the room that remain in the dark, or in the dark at any given point in time when the spotlight is away. And that's really what the unconscious is in our mind. It's the non-reflective, kind of self-reflective thinking that goes on in your mind, but is nevertheless there. And the unconscious covers a broad gamut of different ways of thinking and being. So an example is, if you drive to work, sometimes you forget what happened on that journey, because a lot of that journey was just automatic processes that enabled you to multitask. So when we learn to drive, when we learn to do particular things that we do repetitively, our unconscious actually starts to take over, and that kind of knowledge is ingrained into our mind. And that's the kind of automatic aspect of the unconscious. But there's also the unconscious that's kind of buried or obscured, just to use that metaphor of the darkened room, the things that remain obscured in that room. And they could be past memories that have become suppressed or repressed or simply forgotten to the conscious mind, but still remain in your mind. And that was really interesting to Freud. Like, Freud, remember, was a psychotherapist. He had to deal with patients who had mild to severe mental disorders. And Freud's idea is that much of the problems that these people had actually originated in problems that they had suppressed into their unconscious mind. So it might have been traumatic events from their past, for example, that were suppressed but then bubbled up into their unconscious mind. Now, the challenge for a psychoanalyst is, how do you access the unconscious mind? Remember, the unconscious mind by nature is not available to any kind of conscious analysis. So that difficulty was posed. But Freud's idea was that the unconscious mind emerges in indirect ways. So one way that's really obvious and well known is that when we dream or have nightmares, these are manifestations of unconscious desires or problems, right? So, if dreams, Freud believed, can reveal a lot about what was going on buried within our unconscious. There are also many different kinds of techniques used. One technique was automatic writing, so you would write without any kind of conscious control over what you were writing, and what you wrote would generally be gibberish, but have all kinds of revealing words and metaphors and connections to things that might have been buried into your unconscious. And it's important to get into this because the unconscious is not wholly negative. It's not just the thing that's behind any of our kind of psychological ailments. It's also a very powerful thinking part of the mind that can bring to bear a great deal of analytical power. And the other thing that psychoanalysts use to kind of tap into that is creativity. And there's another method of revealing something about the unconscious mind that psychoanalysts use, which is taking an ink blot and then interpreting that random image into whatever you believe that actually looked like, and that reveals a lot. And there's this idea that this like random images, the way we interpret those random images reveals a lot about our unconscious. So we'll get to this decision-making process now. Now, when we go about making big decisions, like life-changing decisions potentially, we could go through a fair amount of trauma. We can sometimes have sleepless nights. We can try to talk it through with people, which is always a positive thing. But these decisions can take a long time to resolve. Now, a really powerful way that brings us back to Freud of helping us make decisions is using a coin toss. Now, there's a very common way that gets talked about taking a coin toss, and then whatever side of the coin you've landed on makes the decision for you, and that's a really reckless and wrong way to go about any kind of decision making. You should not submit yourself to a random process in order to make a big decision. Instead, Freud is said to have suggested that we let the coin decide for us. So we have this random event, right? And then we interpret that random event. In the same way, remember, I was talking about the ink blots. We interpret those ink blots, and that reveals something about what our unconscious is thinking. Now, if we have this random event, like a coin toss, and that makes a decision for us, how do we feel about that decision? That's when the unconscious comes into play. People often talk about this idea of a gut feeling, and the gut feeling is very much related to the unconscious if you think about it. A gut feeling is, by its very nature, something that you can't put into words. It's a gut feeling, not a feeling of the neocortex. So it has this relationship with the unconscious, and you can make that coin toss and then analyze the way that you feel about the decision that the coin has made for you. So let's take an example. Suppose I'm given the choice to move away to a different city for work. I'll get a pay rise, but I'd have to move away from my family and friends. Now imagine if I said, okay, heads, I move away, tails, I stay with my family and friends. Now if I do the coin toss, I've got a heads. Now that means that the coin has said to me, you should move away. How do I feel about that? What's my immediate gut feeling about the decision the coin's made for me? That makes my decision a lot easier, because all of a sudden my unconscious has been mobilized, my unconscious has been tapped in a way that I couldn't do through the traditional analytical conscious decision-making process. And that enables me to really plumb the depths of how I feel about if that decision were made for me. And that makes the decision a lot easier. And using this technique, I found it really helpful to make bigger decisions. Maybe not so much trivial decisions like, should I buy a Pepsi or a Coke? But certainly for decisions about moving away, or taking on a big life commitment, changing jobs, that kind of thing. I found this technique to be really helpful. I hope it's helpful for you as well. I've actually written a long piece about this idea that I would love to share with you. It's on the link below. I go into a lot more depth and detail about the unconscious, about Freudian psychoanalysis, and about this way of tapping your unconscious to make big decisions. I really hope it's helpful to you. If you found this video helpful, please like, link, subscribe, whatever it is the Google algorithm wants you to do, because there's going to be more, and I'd love to share these ideas with you. Thanks so much. Take care.